All right, welcome, and thank you, Catherine and Shane, for joining us today. This is my wife, Rebecca, and she goes by Becca, but we're going to interview Catherine and Shane. They're friends of mine. I guess Shane's a new friend, Catherine's an old friend. And I'd like to introduce them first, just a little bit of background. Catherine is an excellent mother. She's a math genius, as quoted by Shane. She's been a teacher for 4 years, a math teacher, and she got a master's in business at BYU. And as a side gig, she does face painting. So she's pretty awesome. Now, Shane has started his own business called Boostly, and he does marketing software for restaurants. So if you're looking for a good marketer or marketing software, Shane's your man. So,
that's right.
But today we're wanting to talk about better marriages and making our marriages better and just tips and tricks and things that we're learning all along the way. And so Shane and Catherine, I guess just for a little background, how long have you two been married?
7 years on March 29th.
Yeah, right around the corner, Sunday.
All right.
Wow, congratulations.
Excellent. Well, great. And so 7 years, you've learned some lessons, and we're all learning, and we know that the first several years, I think we've noticed that there are a lot of lessons to be learned. And I could attest that that's the same for me and Becca. Now, first question I'd like to ask you is based on your videos. You two are a really good team. That you work together. You have a mindful marriage, is what I would call it. You actually ponder on what's happening. You think about things. You communicate. So maybe I could just ask, how would you say you two have gotten to that place? How have you gotten there?
Where to start? I think the start of it is just being very intentional. Like from the very beginning, we both really have always wanted to be. I've always wanted to be a good husband and a good father, and she's always wanted to have those similar things. And when we first got married, we were very intentional about investing in developing skills and communication and just trying to consciously improve on our marriage. And I think the intention behind that was one of the most important things.
Yeah, we both came from families where we saw unsuccessful marriages. We saw a lot of conflict, and so we knew we didn't. I think just knowing that you don't want something isn't enough. You have to take that action, like Shane was talking about. And someone told me, one of my friends that she got married before me, she got the advice to treat her marriage like a course that she wants to get an A in. And so, like study, read books, like talk to people that are better than you at it, like get a tutor kind of a thing. So from the beginning, we've interviewed couples that we admire. We've gotten books. We've gone to classes, retreats, and all sorts of stuff, trying to really put in that time and energy so that we can hopefully have a great marriage and not just sit around and hope it's good, like taking that action.
Excellent. Good for you guys. That is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to go in, you've shared, I think there were 12 videos, and we're going to kind of bounce through some of those videos and questions that we've had from those videos. So the first question I got from one of these videos was your second video. And during that video, you kind of shared your perspective on seeking out professional help, and what your feelings were on that, and why, So what feelings led you to make that kind of decision?
Well, we had conflict. And conflict, from what we've learned, is good. It's really good to have conflict in marriage. It's
about how you resolve it.
Yeah.
Really, like conflict can actually bring you together, and conflict is a natural and necessary thing. But resolving the conflict and how you go about resolving it is really where marriages can either be made or broken really easily.
Mhm.
So I felt like we hadn't had any huge problems leading up to this point, but probably, was it 2 years ago? I don't know, about 2 years ago-ish, with Shane's new company and his new schedule. It was really, really demanding. And we just couldn't figure out what the balance was. And it was getting really frustrating. There were a lot of tense conversations where we were pointing fingers, blaming each other. And it was just this cyclical thing that we couldn't get out of. And so there was one night where we got really mad at each other, said some dumb things. And then I said, I think I said, like, we need to see a counselor. But anyway, so leading up to it, there was just a lot of frustrations, a lot of anger, a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of accusing. And it was just this feeling of like, we do not know what to do. So like, we need help. Like, we do not have the answer.
Yeah, we really realized like we haven't been through this before, and we don't know how to navigate this. We really lacked the tools to figure out how do we navigate the emotions and the feelings and just this complex situation. And so it got to a point where we had to do something, and that something was going to get counseling, and was such a good thing and helpful for us. You hear sometimes a lot of people who don't want to see a counselor or go to a counselor and just want to we just want to evangelize like how helpful that can be, because we all lack tools, and there's nothing wrong with that. There are people who have seen so many different situations and have helped people through similar things such as us. So why not go use those? And it's worth it for sure.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys. That is perfect. Now, along with this, in the second video, you mentioned something to the effect of unrealistic expectations, and that they caused you some grief. So, what would you say you learned about expectations toward each other?
I think.
Yeah, what did you learn, Kevin?
I think 2 ways that we had different expectations that needed to change. I think he had the expectation that I just kind of needed to deal with things and like accept that was our new life kind of. And I had the expectation that he was going to be home, like he was never going to be late from work. And that was unrealistic. It wasn't fair to give him that expectation. And I don't think I even realized that I didn't realize that it was so impossible. Because in my mind, it was so possible. Like, if you love me, like if I am a priority to you, you can set an alarm and leave at this time, you know? But
and I would, which was the problem. I would set an alarm.
But then he'd ignore it. But so going to the counselor, it really helped us. He just helped us kind of see ourselves a lot better and helped us get to the root of the problem. And he said, Catherine, it sounds like what you're saying is that you're afraid of losing Shane. And I like started crying. I was like, yes, like I don't want to lose him. Like I feel that his new business was cutting into us time, and I didn't like that. And so I was fixating on one aspect of the problem. Anyways, but he helped us get to the deeper problem so that we could find some solutions. We made some compromises about expectations and made some different goals.
Yeah. So the next question kind of has to do with your third video. And you talked about eyebrows in that video. Which is kind of fun, but it was purposeful. So so maybe you could share a little bit about that. What have you learned about being sensitive to each other? And maybe you can just briefly share what your idea with the eyebrows was.
Yeah. Okay, so eyebrows and
You want me to ask the question one more
Sure.
time?
Sure.
Yeah.
Just edit this all out.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So the next question is from your referencing something you said in your third video about eyebrows. And you mentioned, maybe you could kind of reiterate what that concept was about eyebrows and also what you've learned about being sensitive to each other.
perfect. Do you want me to start this?
Yeah.
Okay. So in my classes, it was a sales class, and they talked about interpersonal skills. And the teacher said that we need to pay attention to our eyebrows. And he said, if you have your eyebrows down when you ask a question, people get defensive. If you have them up, they don't get defensive. And it was just a huge light bulb that went off in my mind.
And so, like, Catherine's whole life, she's always been a really curious person, and her family and friends would always like look at her with these like crazy looks when she would ask questions, and she's like, no, I really just want to know. But she has always wondered, like, why do people get so bothered when I ask questions?
Yeah.
And this is where the light bulb went off.
Yeah. And my mom's been telling me that ever since I was a little kid, like, Catherine, you're intense. And anyways, I just didn't get it. But I came home and told Shane, I'm like, Shane, I learned something about myself today. I have an eyebrow. Yes, that is it. And so we've just learned in our marriage, and he's noticed that he does it too sometimes, but we've learned when we ask questions, for example, like, why did you do that? Or what are you thinking? It is easy for us to have our eyebrows down, like, what are you thinking? Or why did you do that? And it just puts the other person on defense like so fast. So we even call each other out on it sometimes. We say, oh, eyebrows up. And they're like, right,
Funny.
do that.
Awesome.
And it really just changes the tone, I feel like, and it helps us kind of think about how we really are acting towards each other.
Yeah, I think regarding your question about being sensitive to each other, I think that's the root of healthy communication in most circumstances, is trying to get out of what we think and just stepping back and trying to empathize with the other person. And that involves somebody being sensitive and being understanding that we're all emotional beings. Like, feelings are valid, even if it seems illogical. Like, those feelings are real, and people will put up barriers if you just respond sharply, or if you're sarcastic about certain things. Like, it's so important to have real empathy and to seek to understand the other person before jumping to conclusions. That's what I would say about being sensitive.
Okay.
Now, in your guys' fourth video, you talked about wants versus needs. I guess you talked about wants and needs. And you mentioned the idea of self-sacrificing too much. And what does that idea mean to you? I personally never heard of that until I watched your video. So what does that idea mean to you, and what did you learn as you, I guess, learned about that idea?
Yeah. Do you want me? Okay. So self-sacrificing too much just means that you're giving too much without making yourself a priority. So I've seen it in different marriages where, and it can go either way, like the wife will just sacrifice so much for the husband, kind of acting like the husband is the most important person and we need to cater to all of his needs. And then I've seen it the other way where it's the wife, like she's the most important person. She has the most important job. We all need to respect her. She needs her time, just kind of giving too much to one of them. And so I didn't want that either way. I didn't want Shane to self-sacrifice too much for me, like I'm the most important person, or vice versa. And so we so that's what self-sacrificing too much, in my opinion, is.
Awesome. And you mentioned one thing. You spoke with the director who kind of introduced this idea to you, and I really liked what his advice was for you. Would you be willing to share what he told you?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the retreats we went to, the speaker, his name is Jonathan Sandberg. I asked him, how do you know if you're self-sacrificing too much or not enough, if you're being selfish? And he said, that's a great question. And that's something you need to talk with your spouse about and talk to the Lord about, which is such a simple answer, but it makes so much sense because every marriage is going to be different. You can see some other marriage where you're like, oh my gosh, why is that spouse doing everything for that spouse? Is maybe how it appears, but I don't know what goes on in their home. So it really doesn't matter what's happening with other people, but it matters what happens with us, what we're comfortable with, and where we can find that kind of like equilibrium in our marriage.
Yeah, I think too, it's one of those things. I think Ryan Smith, one of the co-founders of Qualtrics, talked about this principle before, of how he really wanted to have an awesome business and he wanted to have an awesome family. And it's such a hard thing because there are times when, hey, I have a board meeting that I have to prepare for, and that's going to take all this time. And so that there's never this pure thing of like, my business always gets a bunch of quality time and my family gets a bunch of quality time. And because then you do bad at both. And so sometimes it's like, okay, I need to fulfill the needs of either my business or my church calling or whatever needs there are. And my family is getting me, but probably not to the same degree. But then you also have to balance that and say, okay, now I'm putting my family and they're getting a majority of the time. And it has to go back and forth. And you have to be in that with your spouse so that when you're in a really stressful spot and something is demanding your time, that's when they're self-sacrificing. And then it has to balance out. Otherwise, you're going to just keep digging this hole and somebody's going to be getting taken advantage of and get hurt feelings, and it's not fair. So you need to find ways to balance it out and alternate through that.
Another thing too, there's a podcast I was listening to called Married Startup, and it's couples who they just talk about navigating their lives while one of them is being an entrepreneur and the difficulties they face and what they've learned. And I can't remember who it was, but one of them said that I think it was Johnny Hanna, but he said that they decided that they weren't ever going to compare whose role was more difficult. Because I felt we were starting to do that. Like, Shane, you don't know how hard it is to be a stay-at-home mom. And he was thinking, you don't know how hard it is to be the breadwinner. Like, and it was this fight that was going nowhere. And I just thought it was so brilliant of them to state that, like, don't argue about whose job is harder, just appreciate each other and try to support each other.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great insights. Well, thank you guys. Okay.
So in your 8th video, you talked a little bit about carving out one-on-one time with your spouse. So what are maybe some challenges that you've identified with this principle, and what are some lessons that you've learned?
Time is a hard one.
Yeah.
Because it is fixed and there's not a lot of it. But I think one of the principles with that is you literally do have to carve it out. It has to be something that is made a priority, and just that technology can be the death of that principle of being able to carve it out. So I suffered from this quite a bit, where especially in the early days of my startup, I was on call 24/7, and if a restaurant working late hours had an issue with our software, I had to pick up the phone and resolve it. And I was just always on call. So I was always looking at my phone, always checking notifications, and I could never be fully engaged in a conversation.
And it was so annoying.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
technically could pay with it, but I was trying so hard to like keep to our rule. And so I was
Uh-huh.
like, nope. And so then I felt like poor kind of, which is okay. It's okay to be poor, but it was just embarrassing, it was this like
Mhm.
really humiliating experience. And then I went out to the car and something else happened like on top of that. Like I can't remember what, but I called Shane and I was like, Shane, like I'm just having such a bad day. And then he's like, oh, Catherine, I'm so sorry. I have to take this call. And I was like, oh, like
Oh.
I'm so mad at you right now, like am I a priority? Just
Mhm.
those feelings, not knowing like when can I expect him to make me a priority. I didn't even know. I didn't know what I could ask for or what was appropriate. So it was a really long, ongoing conversation, but I feel like we're at a good spot now.
A continual process.
Mhm.
Continual.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. So I think one of the key things is carve out the time. Like you do have to carve it out. It has to be a conscious thing.
Mhm.
And as much as possible, I've found like putting my phone away or shutting like my computer, doing something where I'm physically putting technology to the side.
Mhm.
And then like we're not just gonna go watch a movie. We're gonna sit and look at each other and talk.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it can be hard if you've gotten out of the habit of talking to each other,
It
Like,
can be awkward.
Eye contact and
yeah. They're like, so what do you want to talk about?
I don't know. You want to hear about Boostly? Like,
No.
I know, or the kids, or
I'm out of topics.
yeah, I know. Probably Google it, right?
But yeah, something with that carving out time, something we did that's worked well for us is we, from when he gets home to when the kids go to bed, that's family time, us time. He can't have his phone out during that time unless there's some kind of emergency situation that he's aware of or something.
Which is where the unrealistic expectations come in. Like things will happen and we have to roll with it.
Yeah.
But the norm is I get home till the kids are down. That's family time.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
And then we also have the goal is to have a date once a week. It's usually like once a month, but the goal is once a week.
I can understand that one.
Yeah, yeah.
But we wink at each other a
Yeah,
lot.
that's right. And make these kind of eyebrows at each other.
Oh, great. Perfect. Well, just a couple more questions. In your 11th video, and at some point you guys stopped counting videos, but I counted all of them.
You'll keep track for you.
You guys talked about how to handle an emotional affair. And one question I had about this, you mentioned something about directing 10% of your feelings to your spouse. The feelings that you've had directed, might have had it toward another person, and directing those. Could you reiterate that, kind of elaborate what that means?
Yeah. Okay, so there's this lady named Esther. She has TED Talks about, one of my favorites is called Rethinking Infidelity. And she talks about how, why affairs are so appealing and exciting. And it's because it's something new, it's something novel, it's with someone that sees all your good qualities, not your bad qualities. You show forth all of your good qualities. And so she just talks about why it's so appealing and fun. And she said, if you could put 10% of that energy and that excitement that people put into affairs, if you just put in even 10% of that into your marriage would flourish. But what happens a lot of time with affairs is people are putting all of their energy, all of their passion, all of their excitement, like, wearing their best clothes, all those things for that person rather than doing that for their spouse. And so she just recommended, if you're feeling those feelings, if you're feeling that pull to, put excitement, passion, all those things into somebody else, to like stop and like turn towards your spouse and try to do that for your spouse. Like if you were to, maybe like curl your hair different or something for somebody else, like try to do that for your spouse. Or if you were thinking about like writing that person a funny note or something, write a funny note for your spouse, or, just directing that, just even 10% of that to your spouse.
I think emotional affairs are one of those things that we probably don't want to admit it, but they're way more common
Mhm.
than we'd like to think.
Mhm.
But it's like this taboo thing to talk about, and especially like, oh, I don't want to tell my spouse that
Mhm.
like I am starting to have these emotional feelings for this person. And oftentimes just being aware and calling it for what it is and creating an open dialogue is just so important. And it goes for both parties here, that you should talk about it hopefully before it happens, just that, hey, if we ever have this type of a situation, how are we going to handle it? What are we going to do? Because then as time goes on and this keeps recurring and recurring, you just emotionally start separating from your spouse more and more and more. And there are a lot of people who like hear about our experience and they say, oh, I could never say that to my spouse. I could never tell my spouse that I had those thoughts or those feelings or that this was going on. And that is just a sad place to be and a dangerous place to be. Being able to have open communication is the key to it all at the end. And making sure that if you are the recipient, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond?
Mhm.
Pick that early so that you don't say something that you regret or make it worse.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So,
So, you guys mentioned that you've gone to some retreats and you've. I'm not sure if you mentioned, studying on how to be, good partners, or I guess in marriage. And so, what resources have you looked at? What activities? Where were those retreats? And you mentioned a book in one of your videos. Can you just share those with us and anyone that is interested?
Yeah, I'll start with the book. The book is one of my favorites. So there's a book called The Love Dare, and it is just a phenomenal thing. It's like 40 days of essentially daily challenges to help strengthen your marriage. And I can really say it's a life changing thing and
mm.
something that I want to go through like all the time. But The Love Dare, it's a winner.
And that's
Yeah,
that's
that's a really
the
good.
movie Fireproof is based on that. Isn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Okay. Saw
yeah,
that a long time ago. But,
Awesome.
yeah.
oh.
So that book is really good. Retreats we've gone to, they're at Aspen Grove.
Hmm.
It's up Provo Canyon in Utah, and there's different speakers each time with different credentials. So sometimes it's kind of hit and miss. There's
Okay.
when our favorite speaker is Jonathan Sandberg. He's
Hmm.
I think he's been a marriage therapist for like 20 years. He has a PhD in marriage counseling, and he knows his stuff, and he's humble and just great. But then there's other people that are a little bit less skilled in marriage counseling, and they just
Hmm.
are more entertaining, maybe.
Hmm.
So it's kind of hit and miss, but
But even if it's a miss, just the act of going and like physically investing in us and our marriage is worth it.
yeah,
Awesome.
for sure.
Yeah.
We skipped some sessions one time because we thought it was a dud, and
Yeah,
it was great.
yeah. We just spent time together.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's been fun. We also have done an online course. I can't remember what it's called, but Kirk Cameron, he was an actor back in the day. I guess he still is an actor. He was in Fireproof. But him and his wife, they have an online marriage course that we've done, which is good. Another resource is just interviewing people that we admire. We did that a lot more so towards the beginning.
Yeah.
We just literally sat down and asked people questions who we admired about their marriage and what they'd learned and, how to communicate and stuff. So, yeah.
Excellent. You guys are awesome. Any last thoughts or lessons that you'd like to share with us? Things that you feel like stand out as the most important in marriage? Anything that you feel like you can share with us?
I think the the most fundamental thing really comes down to communication. And I've probably said it a couple times during this, but communication where you remove all of the barriers so that you can talk about hard things. I really think preparing yourself on how you're going to respond to highly tense or emotional situations are really important to think through and plan for, whether it's pornography, an emotional affair, a physical affair. Like, go through those exercises of, what if my spouse comes to me and tells me this, and create a safe place for your spouse to have those conversations. And I really think that's one of the most important things that a couple can do to have a strong marriage. I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, there's like 5 things I want to say, but
Say 'em!
there's so many things.
We're all ears.
I think, okay, I think one thing, being super committed to getting over mountains together. So that's how I see conflict, is something that's like kind of small can just get like so big and just turn into this mountain, and it can be exhausting emotionally. Like, oh my gosh, are we fighting about this again? Like, like, I'm sick of this. My natural desire is like, I'm done. Like, that conversation does not exist anymore. I just can't even handle it, kind of. But just being committed, and we even say this out loud to each other. So I say it out loud because that's my natural response, is to run away. Is, okay, we're having this conversation. I'm here. I'm committed to get over this mountain. Because something that can start so small can turn into like an hour conversation. And it feels like a waste of time, kind of like, are we seriously fighting about this? But just being committed to the time that it really does take to communicate and to get over those conflict mountains, I think is really important. Kind of like what he was saying about being a safe place for the person to come to. I think that just, I don't know what the word is, but it just is so, like, the core of that is love, just loving your spouse, like accepting them, accepting their weaknesses and their flaws, and just loving them, and that it's okay for them not to be perfect, and being vulnerable and having that foundation, I think, is super important.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been great, and you guys are awesome to be willing to share with us. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to.
Thank you.